All right, guys. Again, cell phones. I don't care if you use them in the hallway, but in my classroom, no cell phones. You know the rules. If I see your cell phone, I'll confiscate it. You'll get it back at the end of the day. All right, let's continue. During this time was the division of labor. Before industrialization, most workers created their product from start to finish. This was before assembly lines. So if you worked in a seamstress office, a seamstress factory, you would create the jeans from start to finish. You would sew everything together. During the 1920s, if you worked for Ford, you probably would start the car from start to finish. Factories during this time found the most effective way to make large quantities of products was through division of labor, each person doing a separate task. Thus the creation of an assembly line, as you can see here. Or imagine working in a seamstress factory, sewing the same button for 12 hours a day. This took the joy out of work, but it was highly effective. I mean, I couldn't imagine doing the same thing for 12 hours a day. Teaching class for 8 hours a day is sometimes a little too long. Now, we mentioned before, the working environment wasn't the most safe. Factories are ruled by the clock. If your shift started at 8 o'clock, you better be there by 7:50. Unlike Mr. Bauer, who just arrived to class. Had this been during the 1800s and he was working in a factory, Mr. Bauer would be fired and have to explain to his wife and his kids while he is no longer able to support them anymore. It was very strict and disciplined. There were no stipulations, there were no unions to protect the workers. If your boss wanted to fire you without just cause, you would get fired without just cause. And the workplaces were dangerous. We talked about this earlier. Poor ventilation, poor working conditions, loud noises, deafening noise, lots of moving parts. If you can't hear, you're tired and exhausted from long hours and lots of moving parts. Lots of fingers were severed in the factories. I know, it looks disgusting, but if you look closely, the finger is just bent, and they must have put some ketchup or strawberries on it or something like that. Now, working families. This wasn't your prototypical Leave It to Beaver family, where Ward would go off to work, June would stay home, and Wally and the Beav would go to class. Courtney. Leave It to Beaver was a popular show during the 50s and 60s. That was your prototypical perfect family, White House picket fence. If you get a chance, YouTube it or even ask your grandparents about it. It was popular during that time. By the end of 1800s, 1 in 5 children were fully employed. We're not talking working at Hy-Vee. We're not talking working at Runza or working at the Buckle. We're talking about working in the factories. The more money you earned, the more opportunity that you had for food, clothing, and shelter. For a household, this often meant the difference between going hungry or not. Imagine being 8 years old and working in a sawmill, or being 10 years old working in a printing press for 12 to 15 hours a day. If a parent felt ill, the kid usually got a job, if he didn't have one already, to fill in the money gap. There's many cases where kids would have 2 jobs and essentially work 16 hours a day or more and get a few hours of sleep. There were charity organizations, but they couldn't feed everybody. This was still during an era of high unemployment and poverty, and people still trying to establish themselves. I mean, also, there were jobs, but there were still a lot of people, a surplus of people that could be hired. It was also during this time as the theory of social Darwinism held profit results from personal weakness. People felt that if you were poor, it's because of what you did, not your conditions. So, which resulted to many thought offering relief to unemployed or encourage idleness. Why would I give this person a loaf of bread? That wouldn't motivate them to get a job. If I say, come work, and you can pay for it, they'll be more motivated. Alright guys, that's the end of our lecture. We got about a 2-minute video on child labor laws. Be sure you pay attention, write down a few notes, as there could be a couple test questions that come from it.
Hundreds, children were used as laborers for two main reasons. There were no strongly enforced laws against child labor, and they could be paid even less than adults. In 1910, it was easy to find school-aged kids like Furman Owens, who started working in a South Carolina mill when he was only 8. He said he and others like him didn't even know their ABCs, and that they wanted to learn, but they couldn't, because they worked all the time.
Imagine a strong
Individual
desire to
workers
learn.
and social reformers in the 1800s and 1900s fought against child labor, dangerous working conditions, long hours, and bad wages, but they had little power, until labor unions were formed. Striking was an effective bargaining tool,
This is just
but
a
going
preview
on
of
strike
labor
was not
unions.
just a parade. It was
Friday
more like a
we'll
rebellion, and the
discuss more about
situation could be
unions and
terrifying
strikes, but
and
this is just a
dangerous.
little preview, but still pay
Local
attention.
and national governments treated strikes
Wake
as
up,
civil
Mr.
unrest
Peterson.
and often dispatched armed troops to break them up. Workers were injured and many died as they clashed with police and National Guard.
Unions worked very hard to demand legislation that brought about an end to child labor in this country. Unions over the years have fought for legislation to protect workers on the job, but also to protect the living conditions and living standards of working people.
Alright guys, that was just a short video. I will be handing out, as you leave, section 6.4. That will not be due until Friday. I'm going to give you guys a few days to work on it because it's a bigger section. Also, section 6.3 readings won't be due until Friday as well. Tonight, guys, there is a basketball game. Make sure you guys all go. Support the Rockets. Thursday night, there is a concert. If you have a chance, go check that out. Again, guys, you guys were great in class today. Remember, as I always say this, I will embed this in your head. You can't know where you're going unless you know where you've been. The bell will be ringing now, so everybody have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow.